Imagine stepping into a courtroom, ready to do your job, only to be met with disrespect that leaves the entire room stunned. That's exactly what happened when a seasoned prosecutor, consumed by frustration, started yelling at a black lawyer during a heated case. What the prosecutor didn't realize, the lawyer wasn't just any defense attorney. He was the newly appointed head of the ethics committee, a man with the power to hold others accountable for their actions. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the prosecutor's tone escalated, his assumptions fueling his words. But the moment the truth came out about who he was yelling at, everything changed. What happens when someone's prejudice blinds them, and they end up crossing the wrong person? Stay tuned to see how this courtroom drama unfolds, and how justice, in more ways than one, is served. The courtroom had fallen silent, the prosecutor's booming voice now echoing awkwardly in the still air. Everyone's eyes darted between the prosecutor and the calm, composed lawyer standing across the room. Who was this man, and why did he seem completely unshaken? As whispers spread through the room, the prosecutor pressed on, convinced he had the upper hand. He assumed this was just another defense attorney trying to make a name for himself. Little did he know, the man he was berating was someone with significant authority, someone who had spent years upholding the very ethical standards the prosecutor had just trampled on. The lawyer's expression remained steady, but there was a quiet power in his presence. People in the gallery began to realize something was off, something the prosecutor hadn't yet figured out. Who was this lawyer, and why hadn't he responded to the insults? The tension kept building as everyone waited for the moment everything would click. The prosecutor's frustration grew as he continued to speak, his voice rising with every sentence. He pointed out the lawyer's arguments with an air of superiority, assuming he could intimidate his opponent into submission. But the lawyer stood firm, his calm demeanor unshaken, as if he was letting the prosecutor dig his own hole. Those in the courtroom who recognized the lawyer began to exchange knowing glances, their curiosity piqued by his silence. Why wasn't he responding? What was he waiting for? Meanwhile, the prosecutor's assumptions were on full display. He had clearly judged the lawyer by his appearance and treated him as someone who didn't belong in this space. But what made the moment even more unsettling was how quickly things had escalated. This wasn't just a clash of legal arguments, it was personal. The lawyer finally spoke, but not to defend himself. Instead, his words were deliberate, almost measured, as he turned the prosecutor's focus back to the case. His composure only seemed to fuel the prosecutor's irritation. People in the room could feel it. Something bigger was brewing. Was the lawyer just waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth? Or was he testing the prosecutor to see how far he'd go? The suspense continued to build, leaving everyone on edge. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. The prosecutor, now visibly agitated, leaned into his argument with even more force, as if raising his voice would somehow tip the scales in his favor. The tension between the two lawyers was palpable, and the room hung on every word. Still, the defense lawyer didn't break. His calm composure wasn't just confidence, it was control, a quiet assertion of authority that no one, especially the prosecutor, seemed to fully understand yet. Then a small but unmistakable shift occurred. A murmur rippled through the gallery as someone whispered to their neighbor, loud enough to catch a few ears. "He's on the ethics committee, isn't he?" The prosecutor froze mid-sentence, catching the tail end of the comment. His expression flickered with confusion, then doubt. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his tone as he continued, faltering ever so slightly. The lawyer met his gaze for the first time, his calm eyes locking onto the prosecutor with a quiet intensity that said he had been waiting for this exact moment. The weight of the room seemed to shift, all attention focused on the silent standoff. Everyone could sense it. The balance of power was shifting, but how far? And when the truth came out, what would it mean for the prosecutor? All eyes were on the lawyer, waiting for the moment he would finally reveal his hand. The prosecutor's unease grew as the murmurs in the gallery became harder to ignore. He glanced around, his confidence beginning to waver. Still, he tried to recover, doubling down on his arguments as if sheer force would erase the doubt creeping into the room. But the defense lawyer finally spoke again, this time cutting through the noise with a steady voice that commanded attention. "You've made some bold accusations," he said, his words sharp but calm. "Let's address those. But first, I believe there's something important the court should know." The gallery fell silent as the lawyer reached for a folder on his desk. He held it up, locking eyes with the prosecutor. "This document contains a formal review of your recent actions in court, signed and initiated by the Ethics Committee, a committee I lead." Guests rippled through the room as the weight of his words sank in. The prosecutor's face turned pale, the reality of the situation dawning on him in real time. But just as the tension reached its peak, the lawyer added, "And there's more." He paused, letting the moment hang in the air. "What's inside this folder doesn't just affect today's case. It calls into question your entire conduct as a prosecutor." The gallery erupted in hushed whispers, and the prosecutor stumbled over his words, trying to regain control. The stakes had shifted entirely, and the courtroom waited, breathless, for the next revelation. The prosecutor stood frozen, his confidence shattered as the weight of the folder and the lawyer's words hung heavy in the room. "This can't be serious," he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. The defense lawyer remained composed, opening the folder slowly, his deliberate actions only heightening the suspense. "Serious enough for an internal investigation," he said calmly, his voice unwavering. "The Ethics Committee has been reviewing your conduct for months. Today's behavior is just the latest example." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of pages turning as the lawyer laid out documented instances of the prosecutor's questionable actions, rushed decisions, inappropriate outbursts, and even accusations of bias in prior cases. The prosecutor's face grew redder with every word, his attempts to interrupt silenced by the judge's gavel. "Is there anything you'd like to say for yourself?" the lawyer asked, his tone cutting but professional. Just when it seemed the tension couldn't climb any higher, the lawyer delivered one final blow. "What you may not realize," he added, locking eyes with the prosecutor, "is that the Ethics Committee has already voted on disciplinary action. The recommendation: suspension pending further review." The gallery erupted in whispers as the prosecutor's jaw dropped, his bravado crumbling entirely. But then came the twist no one saw coming. "And yet," the lawyer said, his voice softening ever so slightly, "I'm willing to consider leniency if you publicly acknowledge your mistakes here and now." The room held its breath. Would the prosecutor admit his faults? Or would his pride get the best of him? The choice in his future hung in the balance. The prosecutor stood there, visibly shaken, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. For a long, tense pause, he said nothing, his pride clearly at war with the reality of his situation. Finally, he exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging as he faced the gallery. I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice subdued but audible. "I let my frustration cloud my judgment, and I crossed a line today. For that, I apologize to the court and to my colleague." The room was stunned into silence. The lawyer gave a small nod, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Acknowledging fault is the first step toward rebuilding trust," he said simply, before turning back to the judge. The tension began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet understanding that the balance of justice had been restored. As the session ended, whispers of the incident rippled through the gallery. It wasn't just a lesson in professionalism, it was a reminder of the power of composure, accountability, and standing firm in the face of disrespect.